Welcome everybody to the 2018 Insider TV IoT Roundtable here in Las Vegas, taking place alongside CES, the world's biggest tech show, as far as we know. I'd like to welcome all of our participants here today. We have Personal Connected Health Alliance, RTX, Teledyne LaCroix, UL, N-Ocean Alliance, Ericsson, and the Wi-Fi Alliance. Thanks, guys. I'd like, as I said, to thank you all for coming, and as those of you who've been a number of times, a special thank you. For me, 2017 has seemed a relatively quiet year for IoT. There haven't been a lot of the dramatic announcements during 2017. What's this down to? What have you observed IoT-wise during 2017? That'll kind of allow us to kick off. What sort of year has 2017 been for IoT? Maybe we'll go around the table. Michael, do you want to launch that?
Yeah, I think it's really a ramping up year for a lot of verticals, for example. Continuing. We don't yet have IoT in our guidelines yet, but we are very much looking at it right now, and we're trying to decide which direction to go. So.
Okay. Yeah. All right. How about you, Jens Christian?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit the same. Looking at how to actually use IoT, where to focus. As you said, there hasn't been that many huge announcements, so we're really feeling our way through it, trying to find out where is it actually possible to make money.
Are we actually trying to find markets for some of the technology that's being discussed and ways to?
Yeah, I mean the technology is there,
yeah,
but markets it's more difficult.
David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think we continue to see a lot of new small little verticals be born in the IoT space, and the question is, which ones are the consumers really running to? Yeah, it's still not clear to me.
Are they running to any of them?
I mean, they're using them, but it seems like the technology is getting pushed onto the consumer, and which ones really stick. I think there'll be a consolidation. I don't think 2018 is the year for that consolidation, but there will be some time. I do see, as Michael said earlier, I do see a lot of new things happening in the medical space.
Right.
So I think we're going to continue to see a lot more of that. But it's not clear to me yet which one is the consumer running to.
Okay. What about from UL's perspective, Nick?
Well, in the line of questioning, you brought up a couple of additional questions, so I'll try to give you a Reader's Digest version.
Yeah.
I kind of view IoT as we have the lap car going around. The race really hasn't started yet. The lap car is going around. And what are consumers going to run to? There is some space that's getting traction, and that's consumer lighting. And consumer space itself, I think, will probably be the first place we'll see something. Now, why aren't consumers running to it? And I know you have an additional question, but if you forgive me, just
go ahead.
Go on this one right now. I think the industry are retailers and home builders and alliances like Kaba and large, well-established alliances and newer ones established like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, newer ones like OCF Thread. They have to take a bigger step, a larger effort in terms of setting up demos. At UL, we're not the only one. Other places have done it. And large silicon people are starting to do it. They're creating homes with all the IoT devices because the consumers are going to be confused. The technology's there. And you've got all kinds of how does it work, out of box, generational issues, all kinds of things to deal with. So, show me where it really works.
Okay, you're smiling. Have you got a different view?
2017 was the best year in our history. And
right.
The first year I can remember that we exceeded all of our growth goals. Of course, we're in quite a small niche of smart buildings, smart homes. But
you two are agreeing that lighting is a
absolutely
strong factor.
So smart lighting and smart homes, security systems, these voice control personal assistants. So in our niche, we had a fantastic year.
Very pleased for you.
But I agree with the rest. It's not been the killer app, great big breakthrough that many people have been hoping for. But in smart buildings, in medical, in cars, in other applications, we are seeing many exceptional success stories.
Well, that leads us nicely into talking to Magnus, because of course Magnus, the car, is probably one of the most forefront devices that people are experiencing a lot of IoT style technology and applications. I mean, what's your perspective on the way things have been? We'll look into the future for a while, but 2017 in your space.
I think it has been continuously ongoing, gradual increase of the IoT domain within the connected car, right? I remember I visited the CES last year, 2017. It's 53 weeks ago now, and it was all about cars.
Yeah.
On the other hand, we haven't seen those, as you say, the killer apps, the breakthrough innovations coming out to the market, and we know that will take some time for the connected car features to be gradually moved out. But on the other hand, what we have experienced in 2017 is some really interesting industry consolidation and mergers and acquisitions. So it seems to be a industry in consolidation now. The tier ones are gearing up, so to say. The Bosches, the Delphis, the Continentals of the world, and moving into IoT in force now. And I think that will change the environment, the IoT environment, quite dramatically over the next few years.
There do seem to have been quite a lot of acquisitions going on in your space.
Big acquisitions,
yeah.
multi-billion-dollar acquisition, and those doesn't happen just because it's a nice technology. It's a business value in the bottom right, and I think we will see how that will transform the industry in the next few years.
I personally think that in the automotive space, some of the biggest changes of all are happening.
No, it's the four megatrends, right? You see connectivity underpinning, self-drive automation. You see transforming mobility as a service or new business models, and on top of that, you have electrification, right? So it's an industry in change, and connectivity is underpinning all those type of changes, right? It's very, very exciting to be in the automotive industry for the time being.
It's hard to keep up, though.
Yeah, it is.
I know. Kevin.
Well, I agree with what some of the other panelists said. I mean, 2017 definitely was not a breakout year. I don't think we expect 2018 is really going to be a breakout year for IoT. But I think there have been some pretty steady improvements, kind of gaining some traction, gaining some momentum, particularly in the connected home. I mean, it's hard because, where do you draw the line with IoT versus more of a traditional connected home? Just kind of anecdotally, it's interesting. Like, almost all the kids on my block wanted an Alexa. They wanted some type of voice control device, right? And so we're starting to see more and more connected devices into the home. I mean, already an average home has 8. I'm sure many of the people here probably are in the 20s or 30s connected devices in their home, right? But we are getting to a point where connectivity and connected devices are becoming fairly normal. I'll just give another great example. Lennar Homes, which is, I think with a recent acquisition is now the largest home builder in the U.S., is offering connectivity as a standard package when you buy a home. So when you walk into one of their homes, every single home you buy from them has a pre-installed Wi-Fi network providing connectivity, and it's providing connectivity for appliances that they install, door locks, etc. So we're getting there. It's probably slower than a lot of people in that segment would like to see, but we are getting there.
I do wonder how long all of the various voice assistants can continue to maintain individual identities. I mean, are we seeing a future where forever we will have Alexa, Google Home, Siri, all competing with each other to be your personal assistant?
I remember I was standing here a year ago with the Volvo with the Cortana in it, the
Yes.
Microsoft version, right? And when it comes to connected car, the voice assistant really makes sense because it takes out a lot of actual dangerous moves, right? When you have to fiddle around with the infotainment. On the other hand, as of right now, the OEMs, the automakers are opting for one voice assistant, right? In the Volvo case, Cortana, and some other has Alexas and so forth. I don't think that would work though, because I think you would like to bring your known assistant to your car. So I think what might be happening future-wise is that you have a more open system where you can bring your own, so to say, assistant to your vehicle. And many households obviously have different brands, right, on the garage. So
that's a whole new problem for the car companies I hadn't even thought about, really. But you're right.
It is a problem because you'd like to bring your own device in the sense you'd like to bring your own voice.
how are consumers first learning about Internet of Things? What is bringing the Internet of Things experience into their lives? Is it their cars? Is it in their homes, their smartphones? Is it through medical systems? How are people experiencing IoT today?
Well, I think it's entertainment.
Yeah.
Home entertainment. Home entertainment was largely point to point. Now it's becoming a little more assisted, even if it's just through their handset. Lighting, we talked about lighting. So again, consumer space. I think there are people with wearables who are really, into wearables, have been introduced that way. So that
wearables has been trying to work for a long time now, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's never really taken off in the way that I think all of the...
I think it's starting to, though.
You think so?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen it, especially in the medical space, health,
Yeah.
medical, and fitness. But I've been to a couple conferences this year, just amazed by the science and the material science, especially in the battery, all of that. And we're starting to see some of that. It's wearables for healthcare,
Yeah.
if you will. But I think with IoT, and to your point, Magnus, we've got to make it seamless,
Yeah.
right? That I can wear, whatever it is I'm wearing into my car and it still works. I can talk and I don't have to, navigate between Siri or, Alexa or whatever other devices in the car. They don't work today, and I think that's a main goal, of IoT. It really should be.
Can that ever happen while there are dozens of different platforms that people are pushing into the market for people to use? Sure. I mean, does the need to... We talked, I think, at a previous roundtable when Philip Desertel was here from the All-Scene Alliance about there being major flip points in technology rollout, such as when GSM cleaned up the mess in the cellular phone market, when browsers got fixed, so we all used one standardized type of browser instead of all the various different types. I mean, IoT surely needs some turning point like that, doesn't it? When I don't know whether it's possible, but isn't it what's
I think
needed?
it's possible. The question is, how long does it take?
Yeah.
Right? And what stages? I think there'll be stages or steps that the market takes, right? We talk about voice assistants, right? I think there'll always be a couple different options for people when it comes to voice assistants, right? That might mean that the car makers might have to support multiple options. But when it comes to home automation, for example, if you go to a local home improvement store, the options or choices of different standards that you might be able to select from when you're looking at putting home automation in your home, I think there's going to be some consolidation, whether it be a really technology consolidation or someone really trying to build an infrastructure or framework to allow multiple standards to work together.
Yeah.
Right? I would hope that the latter happens because I think the different standards have different strengths in the home. So I think the market will shake that out. The question is, how long does it take?
I think one of the challenges, use GSM as an example, but
Yeah.
that's a pretty simple use case, really. I mean, it was consolidation of a technology, it's voice, right? But IoT, particularly with the vision of IoT, of where I think people would like to see it go, it is so incredibly complicated for all different use cases. And many of the organizations, many of the companies are really trying to differentiate on the experience, right? Well, so how do you standardize experience? Well, either you don't or it takes forever, right? And so I think the challenge, particularly for organizations like Wi-Fi Alliance or any of the other consortia associations, is where do we draw the line?
I would add that, you mentioned OCF and trying to get their interoperability and certification is going to be about a 24-month window, and they're near the end of it. They're starting to do some certifications now. Retailers have told me, and these are the large retailers, global retailers, not just stateside, consumers really aren't brand loyal. They'll go in and they'll get an LG or they'll get a Samsung or they'll get something else. But there's no interoperability, and the retailers are now staffing up fairly large labs themselves just to do testing. So interoperability is important.
Yeah. Well, actually, some of the stuff that will help this is all the LTE stuff now that's coming into the IoT with the LTE narrowband and LTE-M also, because that gives you that connectivity. And you could have a smartwatch that has this technology inside, but it will also have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi and so on. So,
But does that whole area have to sort itself out, Jens Christian? Because at the moment we have cellular-based networks, we have proprietary networks. who's going to win out? Is there space for both? Or when GSM came along, it sorted that out for cell phones. The Internet of Things is using a variety of different
the
products.
cellular operators have a very, very strong case here because they already have the network installed, and especially with the narrowband standard, they have a tremendously good link budget, so you can really use devices way down in the cell. So they have I think they have a good chance of killing the other guys.
So the Sigfoxes of this world will disappear, you feel? You're on camera now.
I think so, yes.
We have to be careful about focusing so much on the basic connectivity technologies, though, right? Because as I said, it's about the experience, and a user, because we start moving into kind of next generation networks where you're aggregating multiple different connectivity technologies, you're seamlessly transitioning sessions from one technology to another. The user at some point is hardly going to know what technology this use case is actually being delivered over. So I think that's why I think part of what's holding us up is, yes, we still have a lot of different technologies, kind of lower layer technologies, and that is going to start shaking out. But it's some of the higher layer things that I think that are really providing a challenge. Not so much in connected car. I mean, when you have a very concentrated use case, it's not such a big deal.
Okay, and when this IoT stuff is getting out there, is it actually working? I mean, we've mentioned we've mentioned several times technology in use in the home and in buildings. Graham,
Absolutely. I mean, the IoT is there, for example, in most modern commercial buildings. When I go into my work in an office or a hospital or a school, I'm walking into the IoT. I have occupancy sensors, door window sensors, temperature, humidity, CO2, and all of that data is being collected and being optimized. So every day I'm part of the IoT. Just most people don't realize.
I was going to say, this means that really a lot of people are experiencing IoT without realizing it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, looking at the smart building case, there are studies that say if people are comfortable at work, they are 15% more productive and 15% less ill.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Mm-hmm.
That is huge. And the IoT is already doing this. I mean, I know in Germany we don't have air conditioning, and in the days where it gets up to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, I'm not very productive. So, you can imagine if you have the environment that you love, the light levels, the temperature, the humidity, the CO2s, you are more productive. And Harvard have done a study to say this is worth $6,000 per employee per year.
Wow.
On that note also, I think now we're talking a lot about consumers, but especially going back to the narrowband IoT question where we started off with, I think that's also not a consumer-driven issue. It's more like a total cost of ownership with industry being connected. Germany yourself, it's Industry 4.0, right? And you see this massive investments now going into connectivity, not from a consumer experience perspective, but rather from a total cost of ownership and production and efficiency in industries like healthcare, like maintenance or manufacturing, and obviously connected vehicles, right? That's a slightly different story when it comes to those investment cases. The business model takes a little bit longer to develop, but once they're in place, I think you will see a much quicker ramp up.
I'd have to, is it working is a very broad statement. And so as I said earlier, I think the architecture is good and it's solid, but as you look at all the different implementations out there, interoperability I still believe is a significant issue.
Mm-hmm.
And as I talk to OEMs, I mean, there are some OEMs where we actually handle their customer support call center for people that have IoT issues with their devices. And the call data that we see is the call volume is not going down of people having issues.
No.
It continues to go up.
Are you supporting people across all applications of IoT? Because I know particularly you do a lot of work with the car companies.
So we do a lot of work with the car companies, a lot of work with wearable companies,
Right.
speaker companies, handset companies, people that are doing different types of Bluetooth accessories around the handset.
Mm.
And even though Bluetooth is a very robust technology from an architecture perspective, as you look at different companies and how they implement different features, it's still a significant issue that OEMs, I think, understand it collectively and are trying to figure out how do we solve it.
So Magnus, would you say we have IoT in the car today, and are people getting along with it?
Oh, we have it. I think we are getting along with it, and I think it's most automakers today have a connected car program in some sort, right?
Yeah.
And then it's a question how to take the next step, and they are doing that right now.
I think most
Associations.
people around the table, and I don't mind mentioning it here, but you know I edit a connected car magazine as well, and so via that part of my job, I end up experiencing quite a lot of the systems in cars that are coming out today. And in my opinion, there's no car companies here, so I'm not going to upset anybody directly, but they're trying to do too much too quickly. Technology is being thrown at cars at the moment, and a lot of it is not properly thought out. You know, I drive cars today that do weird things because of the connected or assisted driving systems in them that you're not expecting them to do, and I really wish the car companies would wind back a little bit and debug some of these systems more, rather than just trying to be the first company out there with these systems and not to be left behind by the rest, which is, you know, the same sort of thing that happens in pretty much every industry when new technology comes along. Everybody's got to be the first out there. But in something like a 2-ton piece of metal which you're driving down the road at 70 miles an hour, that's scary when those things happen. You know, when things that you're not expecting happen do happen. You know, there's a huge responsibility there. And just getting the user interfaces right, for heaven's sake. There's so much variation today. It's just wow. Mesh networking is a part of IoT if we're going to make all these systems work together. How are we getting on with mesh these days? I mean, Bluetooth took a long time to become a mesh networking technology. Zigbee feels like it's been out there for a long time as a mesh networking technology. Does mesh work today?
Yeah, I've been working with mesh since the early days of Zigbee, about 15 years ago. The marketing message is very easy and very strong.
Yeah.
The reality gets complicated once your networks get to a specific size. And I think we need to keep it to simple mesh networking. I think if I hear some of the stories about some of the new mesh lighting proof of concepts that we've seen, you know, like put 10,000 lights in this 1 mile long warehouse and mesh them all together, you very quickly get into a lot of trouble with signals flooding the network and taking many seconds until it figures itself out. So all of a sudden you flick the master switch and all the lights are meant to go on at once, and they go on over a period of 5 to 10 seconds. So you run into all these practical problems very quickly. So I'm personally not a big fan of mesh, having worked with it for 15 years. I'm a fan of, let's call it multi-level repeating, maybe 2 or 3 levels, and using a sub 1 gigahertz frequency to get longer range. And I find over the 15 years experience, at least within buildings and homes, that's good enough for about 99% of your applications. And mesh is probably not really as good or as much required as people think.
So does this mean, carry on, Mick.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
I was actually going to agree with Graham, particularly on the limitations of numbers of nodes. So I think in a smart home, mesh will probably have a better chance of being successful, as opposed to a large building where you're trying to sequence, you know, hundreds of lights at one time. I do know that the people like Thread and Zigbee, although they're kind of close cousins at the RF level, you know, they're looking at their data models and they're trying to work through those kinds of use cases. But keeping it to a small number, mesh has a place, particularly if it's a healing mesh, if it breaks. But I think beyond some number, that number could even be 32 devices or something, it may have some problems.
So this was going to be my point. Actually, contrary to the popular belief, is there actually a practical limitation on the mesh network?
I know.
Can we put a figure on a number of nodes?
I'm aware of some organizations that are become quite effective actually doing product launches of, you know, thousands of Bluetooth mesh nodes in commercial buildings. and definitely issues, right? But they feel like they've been good, successful launches. So, I do agree with my fellow panelists that in the home space, I think it's going to be very limited and very, very finite. But I see a lot of organizations pushing the boundaries in the commercial space to see how far they can push. And it'll be interesting to see. I think the jury's still out.
I think what we'll likely start to see, because I agree, I think there are a lot of challenges in mesh. In many cases, I think the marketing around mesh kind of requires them to target specific applications, whether it is the most appropriate approach or not. But you're going to see more heterogeneous networks leveraging a few technologies to actually transport that data across. I mean, we're talking about the Internet of Things, right? We need to be able to scale like the Internet scales.
Yeah, I mean, the internet is a kind of a mesh, right? So mesh is definitely working, but I think it's a lot about latency. If you need low latency, like for instance, if you want a lot of flights to go on at the same time, then mesh is not really a perfect technology.
So would you say that vehicle-to-vehicle communication is large-scale mesh networking?
No, not yet. Yeah, it's you could say it like that if you have like a PCIe version of V2V, but and you might see vehicle-to-vehicle in very remote areas as well as a mesh network. At least we're not there yet, but we might end up in agriculture applications, etc. In those type of setups, right? But I think for right now, where we stand with the smart city on the one hand and the smart vehicle on the other hand, it's more a V2X type of normal, if I might say, IoT network for the time being.
Okay. So we'll keep the conversation moving along, although I am left with a little bit of a feeling that maybe all of this work has been done over 15 years to develop mesh networking technology to, if not no avail, then perhaps not to quite the level of potential that justifies all the work that's been done.
I think it's justified to find out, as you said, where are the limits. What's practically possible and what is not. And I completely agree where we say get it to a different higher level as early as possible. So get it into a wired network or into Wi-Fi or whatever, where you have more power available, more processing power, and a much higher level of security, which I'm sure is also an issue we'll be talking about today. So with all of these,
I'm not wrong.
So with all of these ultra low power wireless technologies, you have to be looking at power consumption, and that is obviously contradicting increasing your security level. So to increase the security level, we need to get it into what I call a higher powered network, wired network, whatever, which is an absolute must for everything we're talking about.
I think meshing has been done largely at a transport layer. I mean, you send a command to this device, that device. There are, as these new IoT standards come around, they're more upper layer. They're defining scenes. Scenes go here. Scenes take care of these thousands of lights and so forth.
I believe mesh is in infancy. I don't think the true vision of what people have for mesh has really happened, and I think it's going to be a little while until that happens. I mean, when we sat here a year ago, there were some proprietary mesh standards that have gone away and have folded into industry standards, which has been good to see happen.
Well, we're talking about the need to move a lot of this data onto the higher performing networks, but can the cellular networks cope with all of this data being moved onto them, or is there trend to offload data onto fixed networks via Wi-Fi the savior, or can the cellular networks cope?
I guess we might have
I'm happy looking at you two gentlemen.
Yeah, let's find it out.
No, please.
But I think we should really have a mobile operator at the table as well, right? Because
you're the nearest we've got.
But obviously it comes down to business models and costs, right? I think from Ericsson's perspective, obviously our belief is that the network equipment should be able to handle, especially the next generation, should be able to handle this type of data loads. What is it?
Well, it's not an either or, right? I mean, cellular and Wi-Fi have been, amazing complements to one another for years. And I think we probably do ourselves a disservice to try and paint this picture that somehow something is going to change. I mean, what was the latest? I think it was a recent publication was saying that in the U.S., now that many of the carriers have gone to these unlimited data plans, each user is consuming about 31 gigabytes of data a month, so up about 25% year over year. Now, if that continues, that is not sustainable over licensed spectrum. It simply won't be. I mean, you get to the laws of physics, right? And so there are a lot of things that are happening to address that. There's obviously densification, so smaller and smaller cells, typically leveraging Wi-Fi and unlicensed. But there are use cases where cellular or wide area network is the only thing going. You're not using Wi-Fi at 70 miles an hour going down the highway. And so again, I think it's about making sure in particular those two technologies work very well together, where you have seamless connectivity, handoff between the technologies. And that's, I think, the only way you will really cope with the level of data demand we're likely to see.
Sure, I think, but we see it in the 3GPP standards, right? That the later revisions of this make it possible to combine the licensed network and the unlicensed spectrum, and we'll see more of that with a multiplier and of course all the Wi-Fi in 5G in general. So.
Yeah.
Well, which leads me to ask, is 5G the solution to many problems?
Can somebody here at the table tell me what 5G is?
So that was almost the point I was going to make. It seems like every time we have a discussion around 5G, you have to almost set the stage of, okay, well, which interpretation of 5G are we really talking about here, right? It's a little bit like IoT. But, at least some of the key things that when I think about 5G, it's obviously, the aggregation of a number of different technologies. So 5G is about how do I use all sorts of spectrum, 3.5, licensed in sub-gigahertz, unlicensed in 5 gigahertz or mid-band, licensed in high-band millimeter wave, right? It's how do you get all that stuff to work well together, right? So it's not one technology. I mean, Wi-Fi is a key piece of the 5G definition. So in that sense, if you look at it more generally of, densification, use of every type of spectrum out there, then yes, quote, 5G will likely address a lot of this. I think the key thing, getting back to the other question, operators want to use all of it, and they want to use it in as cost-effective manner as possible. So they're going to use the cheapest thing they can when it works.
Yeah, exactly. And you said that operator angle. I think being part of the 5G Automotive Alliance myself, whereas automakers, the suppliers on both the automaking or OEM suppliers and the telecom suppliers, and the operators are at the same table. That's where the fun starts happening, right? How do we get from that perspective that we need to have a cost-controlled environment to a more use case-driven situation? Because once you get into the critical safety use cases, you probably need to start looking into the business case of making network slicing happen. Roaming obviously is always of interest when it comes to the vehicle which moves around in different countries, right? And I think that is gearing up right now. Those type of discussion has been ongoing for more than a year, and they are advancing quickly.
Is network slicing already happening?
On the pilot level it is, but obviously on the streets out here in Las Vegas and elsewhere it's not happening. It's not part of the standard. It's we do see the merits. We are investing in the pilots, but it's not set yet.
No.
So I think that is a hurdle we need to pass, and I'm sure we will, but it will take a few years, right?
Yeah, Michael, I'm wondering how much this talk of connectivity at that level is affecting the medical and health industry.
Medical and health industry for connected health has been very slow, as you all know. But it hasn't really taken off yet, probably due to policy, and even interoperability is also a part of it. I mean, we look at cellular versus non-cellular and figure that there will be redundant paths to do things, and we're watching that. I think we just need to get people to collaborate. It's the user experience. It's getting these different alliances. Hey, okay, this is how medical works. This is how lighting works or whatever. And because all this together in the context of, let's say, an electronic health record might be good information for a provider to receive. If he knows that somebody is moved in the bed and the light was on or off, then he has a little bit better picture about what the person or patient is going through. So there's a lot of many, I call it workflows beyond use cases. And if we can get together and say, okay, we know what the use case is, but what about the workflows? The workflows with other potential sensors in the room or wherever the scenario is. So I think that's where we need to be thinking more at a higher level, and then use the flexibility that we have with each other to adjust. For example, we believe that IEEE 11073 base protocol standards for personal health devices is the right, correct data model. Why? Hundreds of stakeholders from both the medical side and the IT side have come together to figure these things out. But not all of them are perfect experts. We do feel like we have a scalable data model. And I think it's the data model that if we can get the variability out of the data model and everybody agrees to how the data model can work for different verticals, then I think, at least we have the minimum thing we can get out there and we can improve that over time. So.
Yeah, but I've been touching with your data model, but through an OCF healthcare working group. And so, yeah, those are coming together. But I think in healthcare, one of the observations I've seen over the last couple of years, and this takes in going to some meetings and going to the FCC and some discussions with FDA.
Yeah.
It's a very tough environment. In fact, it could even be a litigious environment. And testing hasn't always been something that a lot of the medical equipment people have wanted to do.
There is a big shift, and you alluded to it earlier, David, about seeing a little bit more medical. What we're seeing today, especially in the U.S., is reimbursement. It's now being incorporated into policy. It's taken a long time for that to happen. So 21st Century Cures Act has a little bit about connected health in it. You heard of the HITECH Act in the U.S. 2009, brought in meaningful use. And now 95% of all hospitals in the U.S. have an electronic health record and IT in it. Also, government are looking at Continua guidelines, for example, because it does lay out a framework that doesn't exist anywhere else. It's an interoperable framework.
Does this mean at a very basic level your industry has got over the hurdle? I mean, you and I both have ancient roots in the Bluetooth world where there was resistance to using RF devices inside hospitals. And are we past all that? Is it now talking about how we manage?
I think we're past it. I think people realize that it can be used, and there are many precedent or instances of it have been used. We need to work out the cybersecurity issues. And the IoT thing, I think if we do this right, this is interesting. I don't know if you know this, but the U.S. Congress last year opened up what's called the IoT Digit Act. And so it's a Department of Commerce is being tasked to drive it, but within 18 months when they started, they should have some recommendations, as far as how it could work, not just across all verticals, all industries. And anyway, so I think that's a very interesting thing for us to really watch over the coming years.
Well, you mentioned security, and inevitably we were going to talk about security at some point, so here we are. Security in IoT is a big issue, and at a consumer level there is concerns about security of data and devices that people are using. Some of the most high-profile concerns have been seen in the connected car space, where cars have been hacked, albeit under certain very specific conditions that would be difficult to achieve in the real world. But nonetheless, it's happened, and it's created a bit of panic in the consumer environment. Is the industry doing enough about security? I know this is another of these very big questions, but is the industry thinking about security, or will it be handled as an afterthought?
You started with the car there, and I think the answer to this is yes. They are thinking of it all the time.
Thinking or beyond thinking?
I think they're thinking and acting, but there is no magic bullets.
No.
I think this is a process where it starts with the vehicle architecture, separation of systems, and then all the way through all the different type of equipment and connectivity suites, etc. Right? So you need to protect every single instance of that, and obviously you need to survey, have a proper surveillance, and make sure you actually fix the problem when it arises. It's quite a nasty environment out there when you start looking into what's going on, hacking-wise.
It is, and I was talking recently to one of these professional hackers who actually makes a living out of hacking devices and then going telling the company about it and helping them fix the problem. And I won't name the car company, but they found issues with one of the car companies that they were, in actual fact, it was the car the guy owned. It was his own car. And he hacked it very successfully and kind of worryingly. And he approached the car company and said, "This is what I've done. You should be aware of this." And the car company said, "We don't consider that's a problem." So then, as he does, he went out and made this public. And all of a sudden, the car company said, "We'll fix that."
The car on the street today is not new, right? It's legacy systems after legacy system. Some of them might be 20 years old. And I think it's bad enough if something happened with the infotainment. It's absolutely disastrous if something should happen to the self-driving car. And I think as we're moving along those lines, the security mindset is getting to even a higher standard. Nothing can happen with a self-driving car, period. No. It can just not happen, right? And I think the industry is moving in that direction to make sure it doesn't happen. That's a very bold statement, and you would probably never hear a automotive executive say that, but everyone is working very, very hard on this. They're part of the system. I think ultimately the OEMs, the automaker, has to lead this, right? It's their products, and they need to have the total control of that.
So expanding beyond just automotive and IoT, I think IoT in general really highlights one of the key areas where various industry or technology associations can play a strong role. You look at IoT, and maybe take a step back. When you look at security in the enterprise, whether that's in healthcare or just traditional enterprise, it's pretty good. I mean, there's a long history of people learning some of it through the school of hard knocks, right? But people have learned how to secure many of these mission critical networks, right? And the challenge becomes, now you have this ability to very easily put connectivity into a washing machine or a vacuum cleaner. Well, somebody who makes a washing machine probably doesn't have a whole lot of institutional knowledge in cybersecurity, right? It's just not something that company has done for decades. And so I think, again, getting back to the point of the role of associations, I think it's critical. If you look at what Wi-Fi Alliance does, we're always updating our certification for Wi-Fi security. So WPA2 stays Wi-Fi security. And as we find areas that devices should probably be doing a better job in their implementations, or maybe there's not uniformity in how they're delivering security to the end user, you start rolling that into certification so that at least there's a check. For somebody who hasn't done this before, there's a check and balance on the way they're doing their implementations. And I think that's a key piece of giving the end user confidence. Now, we just focus on the Wi-Fi link. That doesn't help with the internet connectivity and weaknesses that might be out there with cloud connectivity. And so again, it's a number of different organizations and associations need to be paying very close attention to what they can do to drive commonality and consistent use of best practices around security. Because much of this has been solved in other segments. It's just not in IoT.
I tend to observe that security is one of the last things that really gets dialed in, even after the architecture. And then they go after performance. It's functionality and solving some of their own manufacturing issues, then security, then performance. And I think that needed. Now in critical areas like automotive, I think we'll see them taking a lead on security at some point.
I think the security issue has to be solved.
Oh,
And,
absolutely.
I mean, I know you all agree with that, but I don't think that we can get to the next step without having cybersecurity really work with full interoperability and everything, because people have to trust. They're not going to build it if there's risk, right? Especially in the medical space. So,
isn't that going to require some sort of global power to look down and say everybody must participate in making this happen?
Privacy, yes, privacy is a little different than
Yeah,
security,
very different.
but it's very important in anything. You know, autonomous vehicle, I don't want anybody to know that it's midnight and I'm driving 70 miles an hour through a school zone that's not active. I don't want them telling my insurance
yeah,
company.
we're seeing governments do that.
But,
EU
yeah,
is a good example.
EU,
Yeah.
they 2018 here, you have the
Yeah,
General
they-
Protection Act coming in place, and I think that'll have a global influence.
But what's the problem really in having the consumers believing in it? I mean,
It's not necessarily the consumers, it's major corporations such as Roche wouldn't put out an insulin pump if somebody could hack it. Or if there was the possibility of doing it, they just won't invest.
I'm wondering really, and this is a question that's on our published list, but can all of the goals of IoT and all of these applications, whether it's smart home, healthcare, smart building, automation or whatever, can they be met by all these individual bodies operating independently? Or does there need to be some sort of acknowledgement that there's got to be real cross-industry collaboration to make this happen? At the moment, there's still a lot of silo mentality thinking.
I think there needs to be investment in that, a consideration, to have this cross. I mean, it's very expensive for me to be at every one of these other meetings, and I travel a lot. But you just don't have the resources to do all of this. So if that could be, and this is why I kind of wonder if the IoT or the IoT Act that I was talking about earlier, that might have an effect here, at least in the U.S., to see how fairness and how commerce can be done throughout.
I think the marketplace will help us, and I think in all these different alliances and standards bodies, pretty much the marquee manufacturers and service providers are in many of these. If they're going to invest and they're going to fill the pipelines, they're going to be in there, and ultimately either they're going to try to influence or they're going to have others influencing them with relation to cross collaboration and consensus on how different devices should operate with one another. So
Well, that's a good point, Mick, because the industry standards bodies, whether it's a SIG or an alliance or a forum or whatever it's called, they all set the agenda for a lot of development in their own individual areas of technology. And in some cases, some of these organisations have been coming together. I mean, Graham, you probably know more about this than anybody. But is it going to be the case that they should be forced to all cooperate with each other in order to agree practice?
I don't think you can force anybody. The market can maybe push the forces. We do see this. I mean, even at this round table many years ago, we had Bluetooth, Zigbee, Z-Wave, and Ocean all fighting with each other, saying we're going to take over the world. Today, we're all working together.
Yeah.
For example, at the OCF, we mentioned today, and in fact, if you go to the exhibition tomorrow, you will see the OCF booth, and I think it's 14 different technologies working together. So you have a fridge, a television, an air conditioning, lights, temperature control, from different companies using different transport layers, all working together. And we're building the demo as we speak, but if everything goes as planned, it will all interoperate and all work together so that the homeowner has one app and everything can be controlled.
I mean, I'm thinking about, I've been doing Bluetooth for 15 years. When I first started 15 years ago, there were press articles I was reading saying Bluetooth's dead. There's no way it can overtake Wi-Fi. There's no way. And now you look today and you look how Bluetooth and Wi-Fi play together over the last couple of years. You'll see Bluetooth sitting on Wi-Fi devices. You used to really allow two Wi-Fi devices to authenticate. And then Wi-Fi does all the real work. I mean, that's a very common use case.
Is OCF quietly doing a good job of bringing lots of organizations together?
OCF probably has the strongest list of liaisons that are actually active, other than just signing an agreement. They have the strongest list of active liaisons going with all these other various data models and transport people. So, and they have a lot of veterans on their bench that have gone through this over the last decade plus.
How strong is Intel's influence inside OCF these days?
It's very strong. Big consumers, Samsung is probably the big gorilla in there.
Right. Graham, you've been here lots of times. How do I usually wrap the session?
You usually go around the table and
Asking
ask
what's happening in the coming year.
what's
Yeah?
happening in the coming year. Yeah.
So let's do that again, gentlemen. It's not original, but it always gives us a good reference point to look back to next year. Let's start at that side of the table this time, Karen. 2018. What's it all going to be about?
I think in Wi-Fi 2018 is going to be a lot about enhancing the experience in Wi-Fi networks, and particularly a lot of work around managed networks. Wi-Fi plays such a strong role. We move more than half of all data that goes across the internet goes over Wi-Fi. So there's going to be a lot of work going on around improving that experience, allowing Wi-Fi to be better managed. Whether it's we talked about the complementary nature of cellular and Wi-Fi, but in service provider networks or in other managed networks. So something called Wi-Fi Vantage, which is effectively about improving the experience. So a lot going on there. Obviously, there's a lot of work going on in the next generation of Wi-Fi, 11AX. I'm talking about that here, but that's taking a lot of interest, obviously, within the industry. And then just a lot of basic housekeeping. I mean, regular improvements, ongoing improvements in the areas of security, seamless provisioning. How do you take a sensor device and easily get it onto a Wi-Fi network? So a lot of really interesting capabilities, but the main themes are better experience in managed networks and working on the next generation of Wi-Fi.
And the few prospects for Magnus, what would you see?
Right. I think obviously it's connected to safety and ultimately it's self-drive. It's once again I expect and I know there will be some exciting showcases here starting tomorrow. So I think that is top agenda for the industry, but also we are now getting closer to 5G. The first 5G enabled vehicle late 20, and I think we're gearing up for a basically 100% 5G equipped fleet in 2024-25. Right? So we're moving quite rapidly as an industry right now towards that type of environment, and that obviously is on top of agenda. So, yeah, that's 2018 for me.
Thank you, Graham.
Yeah, for me in smart buildings and smart homes, from a market point of view, I think we'll see a much more increased adoption. So basically adopting the technology we've developed over the past 10 to 15 years, as we saw in 2017, so accelerated growth and excellent adaptation results. And secondly, from a development point of view, I think we'll see two things. One thing is working together with other organizations like the OCF to get more interoperability and consumer trust. And the second thing, I think we're going to see a lot more artificial intelligence and cloud-based solutions to take your building to what we call the cognitive building level. So we've gone from the automated building 20 years ago to the smart building this decade. So the next decade, we'll see a lot of cognitive buildings.
And will Enocean sell enough devices in 2018 to get you that air-conditioned office?
I don't think it's an ocean specific. I think it's Germany specific.
A couple of different points. I think we're getting closer to where IoT is a little more crystallized for the end user, where it was just a big mystique umbrella before. I agree with Graham on the development side. There are standards being developed now that will help employ people who were not in the IoT space to allow your cloud developers and so forth. So maybe that's the killer app, is the spec, to get more application developers. So those are kind of some takeaways I look forward to in this coming year.
Thank you.
So I have to agree with some of my peers. I think mesh, specifically in the building and home automation, I think 2018 is the year for it to really start to be seen in the marketplace.
Finally, the year of mesh.
I think it's not going to be the big boom, but I think there's going to really start to be real traction this year with the mesh technology. So I'm quite excited about that. And I think home automation and building automation are going to be the two markets that push that forward.
That's what will drive it.
Yeah, that's what will drive it. And then I think 15.4 and threads. I'm optimistic about that. You see more and more silicon vendors putting threads at 15.4 integrated in their Bluetooth silicon, right? So single chip solutions.
Thank you. Next question.
Yeah, I think machine learning is going to kick off. I mean, we have Watson, and I think there are going to be more, and it's going to be used a lot in relationship with IoT devices, because there's so much that we can't really see what depends on what. So I think machine learning could be big already in 18. Then I think IoT devices connected through cellular networks is also something that is going to kick off for real in 18. And then I hope that we talked about it earlier, the Industry 4.0 will help kick some professional IoT into gear, because I agree that it will ramp a lot quicker in that industrial space when it first starts. So I hope it'll start in 18, and following that, of course, the healthcare part will come, but that will be slower, definitely.
Yeah, great. Okay, Michael.
Yeah, I would agree. I think healthcare is sort of the next priority, not immediate, but I do see some really great things. One, we've defined a strategy for what is personal connected health and delivered on it in 2017. In addition to that, we have what is the continuous design guidelines, and we just released the new guidelines. It includes fast health interoperability resources. If you've heard of FHIR, HL7 FHIR, it's the same thing they're doing on the clinical side, but we're doing it on the remote patient monitoring side, and also have put that out. So it's now available. We are also doing other things, offering our test tool for free. So given no excuse to not be compliant, right? You don't have to be a member. You can use the test tool and just tell us you're compliant. For the next product, it goes through much easier, especially when they do reference specific guidelines such as Continuum. The other part is for IoT is we have what will come out in 2018, another guidelines that will pinpoint how we do IoT. And we're, in general, I think we're looking at NB IoT and then CAT M1, but that's all in our first use case that's now being vetted in our work groups. This is called direct to cloud. And so I think that will be one thing that we'll see more of, hopefully by third quarter this year, or this year. And then after that, I think a lot of the wheels have been greased, or the gears have been greased. So I think it'll start going a little faster.
Well, I think IoT is a concept that in a lot of areas is nice to have, useful to have. I think in the area of wellness and medical and healthcare, it's something that we really should be working to make happen, because that's important.
Yeah.
And I look forward to having the chance to explore that more with you through 2018. So, thanks everybody. That's right now. That's been another fascinating meeting. I always come away from these meetings bursting with ideas about things we should be looking at through the year. So I hope to talk to all of you individually about those things as we go along. I hope you all have a fantastic CES, achieve everything you need to achieve. And I'd like to think that we can meet here again in 12 months' time. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.